1 Samuel chapter 17. I want to pick back up in our series that we've been dealing with in the life of David. We've been dealing with this series and dealing with the life of David, a man after God's own heart. This is the third message of this series. Series began in 1 Samuel chapter 16. Those who may have missed the first series or the first message, second message, it's message number 3. But when you get home, you can go back to 1 Samuel chapter 16, beginning there. And there we talked about how God chose David to be the next king of Israel here. And so we dealt with how God chooses. And then last week, we picked up around verse 14, I believe it was, of chapter 16, 1 Samuel. Talked about how God builds David. After he chose him, he built him, he trained him, he built him up for the task. But then this morning, I want to look at 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Really verses 17 through 50, but for the essence of time, I want to commence reading at verse 32, but we'll bring you up to speed dealing with the story of David and Goliath. 1 Samuel chapter 17. I'm going to commence reading at verse 32. We'll reference back through the early verses to bring you up to speed in this story. Familiar story of David and Goliath. Many of us learned this as little children in Sunday school. Verse 32, 1 Samuel 17, reading from the New King James. If you have that version, you can follow along. If not, it may differ just slightly from your version. But verse 32 says, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart or account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." And Saul replied, You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy. And he's been fighting. He's been a fighting man from youth. But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion and a bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock," he says, I went after it. I struck it, rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, killed it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he's defied the armies of the living God. And the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic and put a coat of armor on him and bronze helmet on his head. And David fastened his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. And he says, "I cannot go in these," said the Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off and took his staff in his hands, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome. He despised him, and he said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" The Philistine cursed David by his gods. He said, "Come here," he said, "I'll give you flesh to the birds and air, beasts of the field." And David said to this Philistine, "You come against me with swords and spear and a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut your head. And today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air, beasts of the earth." The whole world would know that there is a God in Israel. And all of those gathered here will know that this is not by sword or spear, but the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you of this into your hands. And the Philistine moved closer to attack David. And David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him, reaching in his bag and taking out a stone. He slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sunk into his forehead. And he fell face down on the ground. Verse 50 says, so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down Goliath and killed him. And from this passage this morning, this third sermon in this series, I want to talk about surviving the giants of your life. Talk about surviving the giants of your life. Part of God's training plan for David involved God placing this young man David in some difficult situations. And in those difficult times, we discover that David learned to trust the Lord, and he learned how to walk in the power of God and not the power of the flesh. David learned some lessons that really were necessary to survive in life, and not just to survive, but he learned some lessons of how to thrive in life. And we see David this morning in one of the most desperate times of his life in these verses. And here David learns how to trust God for some big things, and in return he sees God do the miraculous. Now, I know many of you have heard this story again preached, and these verses preached and repreached several times, and I doubt very seriously if I say anything or add anything new to what you already know. But I believe this morning that in this text and in this story, some very helpful instructions contain that if we follow these instructions, it's going to lead to a more victorious life for all of us. And I know that many of us are facing giants in our lives, sometimes on a daily basis. Somebody here this morning, you're facing some pretty significant giants in your life, but I believe that these verses can help you this morning of learning how to survive those giants in your life. And as we watch David this morning in this text walk into the valley of Eli, we notice now the Bible says he's faced with this 9-foot 9-inch giant. That's a big giant. And we can see some much needed instructions about how he survives this giant in our lives. And when I look at this text, three things I want to look at, and I'm going to be done, of how David survived this giant in his life. And I believe if we understand these principles and follow these things, we're going to understand how we can survive giants in our lives. Because the reality is, whether you want to face them or not, you're going to face some giants. That's the reality of life, is that all of us going to deal with some giants in our life. In other words, we're going to have some big situations that sometimes look hard to handle. First thing I want to look at is understand surviving is a matter of timing. Somebody says it's a matter of timing. Yeah, it's a matter of timing, because we notice in this text that this day for David began like every other day. When you go back to the early verses of chapter 17, when it begins, he plans to tend to his father's sheep like he had always done. I told you last week that his life, that God blessed him through sameness, that he had the same routine every day. He got up in the morning, going out to the hills of Judea day after day, year after year, tending to his father's sheep. But this particular day was different. It was different because Jesse now sends David, when you go back to verse 17, read when you get home, you discover that Jesse sends David to check on David's older brothers who were out fighting in Saul's army. They had been gone for at least 40 days. Jesse now had begun to get worried, and he says, now, David, what I need you to do, man, is go check on your brothers, because in these particular days, countries did not have standing armies. ordinary citizens, what they could do was they would rally around the king when he called for volunteers to go fight. So these guys were not soldiers necessarily in the army, but the brothers had gathered around King Saul and they had gone out to fight in this battle with Saul. But because they were gone so long, Jesse got worried. So David, so what David does is he goes to check on his brothers as he's commanded. And when he arrives, he finds the army of Israel cowering in fear because of the taunts of Goliath. This big giant had began to taunt them. And even King Saul appeared to be afraid of this giant. And while the army of Saul, they were hiding, the Bible says, in their tents, David's heart hears the giant as he begins to blaspheme in the name of God and shame the people of God. And David's day had started, watch this, like countless other days had started, but before the sun went down, David found himself face to face with this giant. And my brothers and sisters, I want to ask you, isn't that how life is sometimes? We rarely get notice, watch this, when giants are coming. You get up one morning expecting your day to go like every other day. And there it stands, the giant has entered into your life. And the question is, when they come, how are we going to handle it? Because a lot of times when we're faced with that giant, it catches us off guard and it always frightens us. And we look up them and most of the time we have no idea what to do. Lord, what I'm going to do about this giant? And I come to tell you, if we're going to survive the giants in our lives, we need to understand that giants don't just show up. Their appearance is well timed. Somebody say it's time. And from our perspective, we think, oh shoot, this giant just showed up out of nowhere. But from God's perspective, they are all a part of the perfect plan of God. And if we ever grasp the truth, my brothers and sisters, this morning, that everything that happens is a part of the will of God, it's going to change our attitude as it relates to giants. If we ever grasp the fact that stuff don't happen just to be happening and happenstance, but everything has a divine plan of God, we're going to learn how to change our attitude towards giants. And passages like Psalms 37 verse 23 will become real in our life, where it says the steps of a good man are ordered by God. You need to understand that if God is ordering your steps, when things happen, they don't just happen, but it's a part of the plan of God. Tell your neighbor, it's the part of God's plan. And when you understand that God is in control, it helps you react different and understand what's taking place. See, most of the time, we're just like Israel. Israel, when you go back and look at the life of Israel, they had wandered, Gary, through the wilderness for 2 years after they left Egypt. They had arrived at the banks of the Jordan River. They had, all they had to do was cross the river and take the promised land. That's all they had to do. But instead of going in and taking the land, they decided that we're going to send 12 spies to check out the land first, to see what it looked like. And the spies went over and they came back with a negative report. 10 of the spies came back and said, no, man, there's some giants over in that land. We ain't fooling with that. There was only 2 that came back and said, we can take these. But there were 10 that came back with a negative report. And because of that, the people heeded to the negative report of the 10. Watch this. And they had to spend another 38 years in the wilderness. That's where you get 40 years of hanging in the wilderness wondering. And here's the point of all of this. Did God know there were giants over there? Yes, he did. Could he have removed the giants before Israel arrived? Yes, he could. Did he allow the giants to be there? Yes, he did. And here's what I'm trying to tell you. When the giant shows up in your life, you got to understand they didn't get there by accident. The giant is there by the providence of God. It is there because God sent it, allowed it to be there. And it's there because God, watch this, in his precise timing, wanted you to face it when it came up. But when the giants come, we can't get depressed. We can't get defeated. But we got to realize that they are tangible symbols of God working out his will in our lives. We can be like Saul and Israel and we can hide from the giants, or we can be like David and say, guess what? I'm getting ready to face this thing. We can be discouraged, or we can be like Job and worship in spite of what the giant is doing in our life. Don't you know Job had some major giants that came in his life? Job lost his family, lost his finances, lost everything. But at the end of the day, Job said, naked I came, and naked I return. The Lord give it, the Lord take it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's the mindset that we have to have as believers. You want to know how strong you are? How do you handle giants in your life? That's how you see. The real measure of a man is how you respond to adversity. How do you respond when your back is against the wall? How do you respond when it's 4th and 2 on the goal line? That's when you show what kind of defense you really have. I don't care what you look like on the 50-yard line, but when your back is against the wall and it's 4th and 2, what you gonna do? Every now and then, God will put you in some 4th and 2 situations really to find out what you go. If you're going to survive the giants in your life, tell your neighbor it's a matter of timing. It's a matter of timing. But then when we look at the text, we discover not only is it a matter of timing, but then it's a matter of trusting. Because in verse 25 through 40, David teaches us it's a matter of trusting, because when David hears the threats and the defiance of Goliath, he determines in his mind that something got to be done about this. He makes his intentions known, and David sets out to see Goliath defeated. But as soon as David expresses his desire, watch this, to see the giant defeated, he's met with criticism. How you know that, Pastor? Watch verse 28. When Eliab, David's older brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and said, man, why? What you even doing here? Here whom you left the sheep by themselves? What you doing here? He says, I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Lord have mercy. Criticism. And then not only was he faced with criticism, now he's faced with doubt, because verse 33, watch this. Saul replied, you're not able to go against this giant because you ain't nothing but a little boy. He's doubting him. But as we watch David move toward this moment when he's going to face off with this giant, we see this young man who has learned something about faith and trust in the Lord. 3 things we discovered he learned. First of all, you can write these down. David has learned about God's purposes. See, David had been anointed as king to sit on the throne, and David knew that he wasn't going to die this day. See, when God has a purpose for your life, no matter what you go through, God's purpose got to go. Have mercy. You remember, God had already anointed him to be the next king. So if God anointed you to be the next king, whatever you got to go through, I ain't gonna die. Touch your neighbor and say, God got something for me. I can't die. I won't die because God has already shown me what he has for me. Touch your neighbor and say, there's purpose behind your life. There's purpose. God got purpose behind your life. And whenever there's purpose behind your life, I don't care. A broke leg can come, an arm can come off. But tell your neighbor, I ain't going to die because my purpose will be fulfilled. But not only did David learn the lesson about God's purpose, but he also learned the lesson about God's protection. Because in verse 34 through 37, David knew that everything God had done in the past, he was going to do it again. If he already allowed you to conquer that bear and that lion, how much more will God do it? In other words, God, if he did it before, touch your neighbor and say he'll do it again. There's some people in the building who say, if God protected last year, if God brought you to 2012, listen, how many people can think about the worst year of your life? Some of us can go back to 2005, 2006, and just to begin to think in your mind, what was the worst time in my life? And if God brought you through that, you're ready for this. David learned about trusting, man. He learned about God's purposes. He learned about God's protection, but then he also learned about God's power. Because in verse 38 through 40, David knew that victory did not reside in swords, in shields, in spears, in arrows, or bows, but it was in the power of God. And he would not go into this battle with the same God and the same weapons he used before. In other words, David's trust was not in the army or the armor, but it was in the Almighty. His trust was not in the armor or the army, but it was in the Almighty. And we got to understand that. See, David understood this thing, man. Listen, God had the same God that protected him and given him victory on the hills of Judea would grant him the victory in the valley of Eli. See, for David, there was only one giant there that day, and his name was not Goliath, but his name was God Almighty. And you got to understand that when giants come up against your life, there's only one giant I'm dealing with. There's only one giant I'm siding with, and that's the giant of God. And what an amazing lesson that is for us who face giants from time to time in our life. If we ever learn the same lessons that David learned about fighting giants, Lord have mercy. You got to know something. Here it is. You got to know that God did not save you for some giant to destroy. God ain't saved me for some giant. God saved you to take you home to glory someday. And that giant cannot undo the eternal work of God. See, that giant is there as a part of God's eternal plan in your life. That giant is there, watch this, to grow you and to help develop you. And there's nothing like, listen, you got to understand that God's purpose is going to come to fruition. And God will use that giant as a teaching tool. A life lesson. He'll make, watch this, your enemies your footstool. That giant ain't nothing but some stairs to help you climb to where God is trying to take you. Every now and then God allow them giants to just become your stairway to help get you to where I'm trying to get you. And then second, you got to understand that God will not change courses in the middle of the stream. See, he will always be that which he has ever been. And one of the greatest attributes of the Lord is this word right here. He's immutable. That's right. Come on. He's immutable. What does that mean, Pastor? He's unchangeable. God ain't going to change up on you. People change up on you. But God ain't going to change up on you. He's the same yesterday, today and forevermore. Yeah, so you got to know that God is not, he is the self-existent, changeless God, and you can trust his protection. And then thirdly, listen, let me get out of here, folks. So we got to understand, we can, tell your neighbor, we can survive these giants. You can survive the giants that come in your life very easily. Understanding that surviving is a matter of timing, man. God got this thing all in his precise timing. But then it's a matter of trusting. But then thirdly, you have giants in your life, it's a matter of taking. Somebody say you got to take it. There comes a time when talk got to stop and action got to begin. See, the time has to come for David to take that which has already been given to him by the Lord. Listen, he walked down into the valley, faced the giant, declared the faith of God, swung the stone, killed that giant, and what a moment it must have been for his life. And I come to tell you, there's going to come a time in our life when you can't talk no more. Talking got to stop. And taking has to begin. And as we face our own giants, watch this, it's going to come a time when you got to start taking faith over some things and stop talking about it. We talk about how God is going to provide. Oh yeah, my God shall provide all of my needs. According, we love that scripture. But we still worried about our finances. We still worried about small stuff. We still worried about, we talk about all the grace of God. We talk about his grace is sufficient for us. But we still act like we ain't going to make it. Oh, we talk about how God is control of our life. For we know all things are going to work together for the good of them that love God and who are called. Listen, but we act like our lives are out of control. Tell your neighbor it's time that we stop talking about it. It is time to be about it. It's time to take this thing. David defeated Goliath because he was willing to take what God had given him by faith. And it's time for us, my brother. See, at some point you can't talk no more. Talk only gets you so far. See, a lot of people got a big bark, but you ain't got no bite. Tell your neighbor, stop barking. And you gotta stop. Yeah. Because a bark ain't nothing but a bluff. And a bluff can't defeat no giants. Because a giant, listen, a giant ain't scared of a buff. But I guarantee if you bite his behind one time and let him know, man, I ain't came to play with you. I ain't came out here to play. Listen, let me get out of here. David said, I ain't came here to talk no more. Touch your neighbor, said talk is cheap. We got to start letting the giant know that you will not defeat my family. You will not defeat my finances. You will not defeat my health. Because the God I serve, he's able. Wish I had somebody in the building who could say time out for talking, time out for bluffing. But I ain't bluffing no more. I come to tell you it's game time. See, anybody can talk before the game. But when the whistle blows, when the clock starts ticking, touch your neighbor and say it's game time. You got to strap up, baby. It's game time. We used to say it like this. You got to pull up or you got to shut up. And I tell you, somebody to touch your neighbor and say it's time to pull up. It's time to let the devil know. It's time to let the lion know that you can't defeat me no more. Because the God that I serve, he's bigger than you, giant. Stop telling God how big your giants are and start telling your giant how big your God is. I tell you to grab your neighbor and say we're going to fight this joker together because united we stand, and if we fight him together we can take this giant out. He will not defeat my family. He will not defeat my children. Anybody got some giants in your life? It's time to defeat them. It's time to take them on. You can beat them by faith. May not have swords, may not have guns, but tell your neighbor, I got the word of God. I got everything I need. I got the prayer of God. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. Grab your neighbor, and it's time to take out your giants. You got to go in your secret closet and begin to pray and tell your giants, giants, get out of my way. Giants, you will be defeated. But the God I serve, the God I serve, the God I serve. High five your neighbor and say, we're survivors, baby. We're survivors. I know it's breast cancer month, and we got some survivors in the building. But I come to tell you every day, it's surviving giant month. Every day, it's surviving giant day. High five your neighbor and say, we're survivors. We're survivors. Because we're here today, because we survived some giants. Wish I had somebody who can testify and say, I've had some giants in my life, but I'm here today because I'm a survivor. Do me a favor, shake somebody's hand. Matter of fact, hold 3 people around you and just encourage them and tell them keep surviving, keep surviving. You are a survivor. You're surviving giants every day of your life. Tell somebody you're gonna make it. Keep on surviving. Surviving your giants.